The Good Dinosaur is the weirdest film Pixar has ever put out. No, I'm serious. It's this one. Even for a studio that did a film about a rat controlling a French chef with his hair, The Good Dinosaur is weirder. It's weird in the sense that I have no idea why Pixar decided to make this film. The Good Dinosaur seems to revel in bucking every trend of how to construct an animated picture, a film that has no interest in marketing itself toward any kind of audience. It looked at Ice Age and said, let's do the opposite of that. This is their lowest grossing film at the box office, and I am not surprised. It is a film that is completely disinterested in world building, introducing colorful supporting characters, and even having subplots, basic building blocks of an animated feature. I wish I were in the marketing room at Disney when they were trying to figure out how to market this thing. That being said, The Good Dinosaur is secretly one of my favorite Pixar films ever, and I don't really know how to deal with that. Because as much as I may love this film, it has some real issues in it that go beyond buzzy marketing components. My brain is fighting a little with my heart with this one. So here we are now. I think my favorite thing about The Good Dinosaur is its beautiful portrayal of what it's like to be a scared kid in an uncertain world. This is, at its core, a coming-of-age story. A story about a kid learning to grow up, face these uncertainties, and prove something to himself. I enjoy how simultaneously sympathetic and frustrating Arlo is as a character, right out of the gate. When he's first hatched, he's terrified to take his first step into the world, and you're like, "Aw, the poor little guy is scared." But then as he grows older and is struggling with feeding the chickens, you kinda roll your eyes. Like, come on dude, get it together. They're just chickens. I wouldn't say I sympathize with his brother right here, Buck is kind of a jerk, but you get where he's coming from. Arlo's father literally tells him that he won't be able to survive in this world if he's so scared of it. Arlo's cowardly demeanor isn't the only thing that defines him, however. They also establish in Act 1 that there's a lot of bluster and bravado to him. That when he's determined to do something, he's going to frown and glare at people and make his presence known. But it's all bluster. The moment anything goes wrong, the facade immediately crumbles and he has no idea what to do. The terrified kid immediately returns. In the last review, I talked about how Finding Nemo is the bizarro version of The Good Dinosaur, describing them as mirror images of each other. They both feature a father-son relationship, the theme of overcoming fear, the death of a parental figure, and the story of a character who gets lost in the wild. Except in The Good Dinosaur's case, the father-son relationship is cut short. And much like Coral in Finding Nemo, this death is a driver of the protagonist's fear, something he has to come to terms with. The Good Dinosaur is told through the eyes of a child, who somehow has to find catharsis with his father, without physically reuniting with him in the end. In terms of resolving the father-son relationship, The Good Dinosaur is inherently going to be the more messy film. When discussing this review with a friend, I was asked if I think Henry is a good father. And after thinking about it, my answer is yes. The film is very careful with his characterization in Act 1. He's mostly patient with his son, insisting that Arlo will be able to make his mark, he just needs more time. He is constantly pushing Arlo to try new things, like when he encourages him to go on a scary walk into the fields at night. Henry gives us one of the film's lessons up front, telling us, sometimes you gotta get through your fear to see the beauty on the other side. This is one of the biggest feel-good moments of the film, a brief little glimpse of the magic and wonder that Arlo needs to discover. And then Henry gives Arlo the job of dealing with a critter. Here's where the debate really comes in, that he doesn't truly understand his son. To Henry, this task is important to their survival. If animals eat their food, they'll starve in the winter. He doesn't understand why his son isn't able to bash a critter in the head in order to help them survive. This is another key difference between this film and Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo is a fantasy. It doesn't dwell on the harsh, cold reality of what people do to survive. The Good Dinosaur is more in line with something like The Incredibles' worldview. There's a really interesting moment in that film, where Helen brings up the comic books her kids read and reminds them that the men on the island will kill them if they get a chance. The danger is articulated, the sense of fantasy vanishes. The Good Dinosaur is an interesting variation on this because it tries to balance the message of the world will try to kill you with the world is full of beauty. Anyway, this is where Henry gets fed up with Arlo and shoves him over the fence to chase after the critter. This is definitely his ugliest point, him basically forcing his son into something he doesn't want to do. It strikes me as being very honest about how frustrating fatherhood can be. That moment of, fine, I will show you how to do it myself. The distinction is, and here's why Henry is still a good father, is that when Arlo lags behind and hurts himself, Henry stops. He immediately realizes what he's done and apologizes. Arlo tearfully professes that he's not like him, and Henry reassures him, "You're me and more." Henry still has a profound misunderstanding of his son, and still doesn't know how to motivate him. But the point is that Henry is always looking out for him, knowing when he's pushed him too far. When the storm comes and the giant wave of water approaches, Henry throws Arlo to higher ground before trying to save himself. Henry's death is particularly brutal in that there are still things left unsaid with Arlo, a cloud of uncertainty that is forced to hang over the rest of the film. Then, after Arlo chases the critter into the river, we get into Act 2 proper. It's a bizarre transition, doing 2 swept-away scenes back to back. Obviously done to set up stakes, just really strange and disjointed in its execution. Feels like a rewrite scene to me. Act 2 of this film is really where things get weird, where it starts to diverge from your typical Pixar film. Because it is a really, really, really slowly paced act. There are no subplots, no side characters to flash to, like in Finding Nemo. It is literally just Arlo wandering around the forest, trying to survive and find his way home. It is practically shot like a nature documentary. Here is the young Apatosaurus, washed up on the river, his limbs no longer working. He will be eaten within days. Arlo goes through a lot of crap in this movie. Like, a lot of it. I cannot understate how much stuff Pixar puts this kid through. Even him teasing a critter, he is immediately punished. I think there's a legitimate argument here that Act 2 is too deliberate in its pacing. We get a cute moment with the berries, but it immediately goes south when Arlo's leg gets trapped. A funny little scene turns into another desperate struggle, as Arlo panics, trying to dig himself out. The scene ends with the kid crying in the dark. To say that this film also suffers from a bit of emotional whiplash is an understatement. The thing is, I kinda love Act 2. It's actually my favorite part. And here's why. The Good Dinosaur is a film about baby steps. Like, the first thing we see Arlo overcome is his first step into the world. There's a lot of imagery about characters taking steps. They open with Henry walking proudly across the field, and they make a big deal about using your footprint to make your mark. There are a lot of conspicuous shots of Arlo's feet walking through the forest. It's almost as if someone at Pixar is really into, dinosaur feet. But what's cool about Act 2, and The Good Dinosaur in general, is that it crystallizes the coming-of-age story into its most essential piece, the essence of what this kind of plot looks like. It's like an exercise in plot minimalism. It's not like How to Train Your Dragon, where the character development is tied to the dragons. It's not like Spirited Away, where the character development is supported by a huge cast of surreal gods and demigods. Now granted, these are both better films than this one, and I prefer those more as a whole. There is obviously a reason why these elements are important in constructing a narrative. But there is also something compelling about how The Good Dinosaur consciously strips away a lot of that stuff and tells such a laser-focused story. It's just a survival story. It only cares about following along with Arlo's journey as a character. We never leave his side. One of the major plot points of Act 2 is Arlo losing track of the river. That's it. That's the shift in the story. Weird. This segment of the film also contains a lot of frolicking with Spot. I guess I shouldn't overstate how heavy this section is, because there is indeed a lot of frolicking. There's another parallel to How to Train Your Dragon here, with Arlo choosing to spare Spot when he first meets him. Not a lot is made about why Arlo does this. We generally accept that Arlo just took pity on him. Their relationship in general is handled extremely casually. They don't really feel the need to articulate why the two characters are drawn to each other. Like, Spot tries really hard to befriend Arlo, bringing him all that food and stuff, presumably because he had saved him from that trap. Arlo, meanwhile, only opens up because he's so darn starving and desperate. When they do finally become friends, it's a series of silly little vignettes. Playing with moles in the ground, meeting this big creepy weirdo, learning how to swim, doing lots and lots of drugs together. Seriously, what the heck am I looking at? The Good Dinosaur is one of Pixar's most visual films, and Act 2 is the big reason why. From a construction standpoint, we run into issues that Spot, in essence, can't talk. We don't get funny Dory or Russell or Buzz Lightyear humorous quips. A lot of the joke telling has to be visual in nature, almost like a silent film. There's a smidge of Wall-E DNA right here, leaning so heavily on character acting to get its point across. Like, let's take the second Firefly scene as an example. This is, by the way, my favorite scene in the entire film, one of my favorite sequences in all of Pixar. It's initially a recreation of the earlier scene with Arlo's father, and is, once again, quite beautiful and heartwarming. But it almost immediately becomes bittersweet. This nice little moment reminds Arlo of how much he misses his father, and his family by extension. Then we get the discussion with Spot about family, complete with sticks and circles as the visual metaphor. We learn that both of Spot's parents have passed away as well. See, this is what I mean when I describe what a visual film this is. Arlo is narrating part of it, sure, but it is literally just a character here, staring at sticks in the sand longingly, and the two of them howling at the moon in mourning. This is a scene that's really easy to make fun of. Like, they're howling at the moon, guys. But what I appreciate about The Good Dinosaur is that it's very real about how people handle grief. I have been to my share of funerals in my life. This is what grief looks like. It's not pretty. Stuff that used to be great is now different. There's something that hangs over it. There is an argument that The Good Dinosaur rolls around in its grief a little too much, and is way too sentimental in general. I think that opinion is totally valid. This film is full of highs and lows. It doesn't bother me in this case because it's part of that distillation of a coming-of-age story. The character needs to go through a lot, repeatedly, in order to finally change. There is no quick fix. How Arlo treats the fireflies in this scene is already way different than his first encounter. Once again, baby steps. He's getting there. Things are just different now. The villain of this piece is fear, which is personified by the storm, which is personified by the pterodactyls. I like the bait and switch they do right here. These guys show up at first almost like they're Finding Nemo characters. Characters just show up and dump their moral on the protagonist, and then leave. Arlo has clear issues with storms in general. The memory of his father's death continues to haunt him, and these characters deliver an almost Batman-esque pitch about the storm, that it should be embraced. The storm will provide. Pixar frames these guys like religious fanatics, worshipping the storm and evangelizing it about it to others. The revelation versus relevation wordplay makes this intent clear. Thunderclap suddenly eating the friendly critter is yet another sobering reminder of the kind of world this film exists in. There is no warm and fuzzy moral here. Steve Zahn delivers a delightfully unhinged performance right here, blending a friendly and menacing demeanor. These guys serve as a decent stand-in for Arlo's fear, since he can't exactly fight a rainstorm. A little bit of the subtlety is lost, however, as Thunderclap literally goes on a tirade about how he's not afraid of anything. Okay, we got it. You're the storm. Next we go to the T-Rex segment of the film, a segment I like in terms of plot function, but kinda hate in terms of execution. The problem with them is that they shine a spotlight on how little The Good Dinosaur has done with its world building. Arlo struggles a lot in Act 2. The world is not exactly a friendly place to him. So when confronted with the ultimate threat to a dinosaur, they turn out to be friendly cattle ranchers. What the heck? You start to question, how does the world of The Good Dinosaur work? The pterodactyls don't seem interested in eating Arlo, at least since he's not injured. Is there some kind of gentleman's agreement among dinos to only eat critters? How does a carnivore like a T-Rex feed itself? Have T-Rexes just become meat farmers for themselves? It's good to let us use our imagination, it's just unsatisfying how we're suddenly sideswiped by this kind of world dynamic. These three T-Rexes obviously serve as a surrogate for Arlo's original family, with a new father figure to deliver the life lessons. Arlo plays off of Sam Elliott's character well, with some fun little back and forths between them. They recreate aspects of the first Firefly scene again, with the father figure throwing Arlo into an uncertain field, and once again, Arlo is too terrified to get the job done, so Spot helps him out. The Raptors are threatening and all, but pretty forgettable as a whole. Their yokel performances strike me as a little too gimmicky and stereotypical. But I appreciate that this is a moment used to demonstrate character growth. When the stampede happens and the battle rages, Arlo jumps into the fray to knock away a couple raptors. The Arlo at the beginning of the film wouldn't do this. Baby steps. Another interesting parallel that The Good Dinosaur has with Finding Nemo is its usage of scars as a visual metaphor. This film views them almost like a badge of honor, a reminder of something that has been overcome. The obvious moral to this story is that Arlo simply won't be afraid anymore. This seems to be what the film has been building toward, and Arlo literally states this moral himself. But the film takes a slightly more mature and pragmatic stance, that fear is something that can't be conveniently gotten rid of. Fear in itself is a part of living. That it's acting in the face of fear that really proves what a person is made of. This is still a fairly standard moral, let's not lie to ourselves, but it strikes me as being more honest and high level than the expected one. Our big breakthrough moment for Arlo happens during the herding scene, where he successfully guides them back on course. Arlo is finally asserting himself in a meaningful way. He's not just relying on Spot anymore to help him out. It's really late in the film, but I think this is the right place to put this moment. He's had his experiences with Spot. He's jumped into a dangerous situation. The lesson has been articulated. He should finally be in a place where everything clicks for him. This leads into, by far, the biggest feel-good sequence of the film. The moment of triumph, the moment of Arlo being able to do anything. Run through those birds, leap across those mountain peaks, toss Spot into the air. It's almost like the Breath of the Wild of Pixar movies, to put it in Zelda terms. I just can't deal with how pretty this film is in general. Not since seeing WALL-E in the theaters have I just marveled at how good a CGI film can look. I just love how this thing is shot. Just beautiful landscapes everywhere, beautiful character compositions. Their constant usage of lens flare, or POV shots of Arlo fading in and out of consciousness. The character acting as well. You can see Arlo's body heave in and out as he breathes, the air going through his nostrils. His achy bones in his knees as he struggles to stand up. Big expressive eyes. I know some people hate Arlo's design and the general cartooniness, but I think he is a beautifully animated character. There's a physical weight to him that isn't always conveyed in animated films. Now that Arlo started to assert himself, the only thing left for him to do is confront the storm. The pterodactyls return again, doing a menacing shark fin routine. I find this whole thing a little cheesy overall. Like, look Ma, there's sharks. I do like the way it ties together the river, water, clouds, and sky, all dangerous elements in Arlo's past. Then we go to the dream sequence, a sequence that basically wrecks me every time I see it. This is usually where I start yelling at the film, "Why is this movie so sad? Stop making me feel bad." The dramatic irony of the scene kinda destroys me, because everyone in the audience should know that this is a dream up front. Young children perhaps not, but let's say most people. Arlo gets whacked in the head with a rock, and then suddenly his father appears, alive and well. Like no film is ever going to do a Deus Ex Machina this big. Get real. So when Arlo is basking in the warm glow of being with his father, we all know it's a lie. And when Arlo finally notices that his father isn't making his mark anymore, it gets even worse. The sudden acceptance of Arlo that he is alone in the world, and that his father is not there. The tearful declaration that he loves Spot and needs to go back to help him. Him finally being able to articulate his feelings to his father beyond, "I am not like you." The thing is, and here is why this film is a little more unsatisfying than Finding Nemo, is that they don't make it crystal clear what Henry actually wanted. He says, "You're me and more," but he never quite defines what the more part means, from his point of view. Henry wanted him to get rid of the critter, wanted Arlo to make his mark. Arlo is making his mark in a completely different way. There is an ironic usage of "take care of that critter" right here that ties both meanings together. But because Henry doesn't get the character progression like Marlin does, we can never know if he ever learned to understand his son. We can get really ethereal and say this is his spirit visiting Arlo, almost like the Lion King, or we can say this is a complete fabrication of a grief-addled kid's brain. They deliberately leave this ambiguous. The point is to give Arlo closure with his father, but it's not a two-way street. The climax is generally fine, although not super spectacular. It appropriately takes place at the river, where he fights off the pterodactyls. It brings in some nice callbacks too, like Arlo using his tail to chop down a tree, and Arlo finally finding his voice, and then demonstrating his newfound swimming skills when trying to save Spot. Also, they throw a stick at Thunderclap. Weird. The point of the whole thing is obviously to recreate Henry's death scene, to let Arlo finally overcome it head on. However, I think they went a little too far with the waterfall. It makes me wonder how Arlo's dad gets killed by the same rushing water, but Arlo can get crushed by it and then get thrown off a waterfall and be fine. This isn't a big suspension of disbelief movie in general, but they're kinda testing the water right here. I love the callback to the Fireflies once again, when Arlo blows air onto Spot. Really pulls together the metaphor of the world coming to life. Good job, Pixar. The only thing left is the final goodbye between Arlo and Spot. This is foreshadowed really late in the film, and comes a bit out of nowhere, which hurts it as a whole. But the execution of the moment itself is great. After seeing Spot with the other humans, Arlo decides to let his friend go, and let Spot have a new family. When I first saw this film, I wasn't sure how I felt about this ending. Part of me was like, he's leaving? Why is he leaving? Spot! Come back, Spot! Feels like they're doing a bittersweet ending for the sake of having a bittersweet ending. The happy moral would be, it doesn't matter if you're a human or dinosaur. Family is family. Spot and Arlo are family now. On a rewatch, however, I don't think such an alternate ending would hold up. Arlo basically treats Spot like a dog. I mean, Spot does act like a dog. The film is basically a boy and his dog. But obviously, Spot is not actually a dog. Keeping him like a pet on the farm isn't necessarily the responsible thing from a developmental standpoint. It's the selfish standpoint. Just look at the way Spot reacts when the mother character strokes his cheek. A real human connection. Arlo and Spot are totally bros and all, but when it comes down to it, this isn't something Arlo can really do for Spot. You notice, when Spot walks away from Arlo for the last time, he is now doing it upright, on two legs. Baby steps. Oh, and the circle thing comes back in a big way. Goosebumps. Total goosebumps. Another scene that's really easy to make fun of, but it's so darn earnest, I refuse to do it. It's important to be earnest. The film ends with Arlo finally returning home. It recreates the opening moments with Henry, walking tall across the field, this time with Arlo. Once again, a little on the nose, especially with his mom confusedly wondering, Henry? Way to lock down that character progression, guys. The film ends with Arlo finally making his mark on the silo, a sort of inevitable conclusion set up from the very beginning. I do like the irony that this film basically boils down to Arlo finally getting rid of the critter after an hour and a half of screen time. Henry was certainly right by saying he needed a little extra time. I find it incredibly appropriate and almost poetic that this film was the follow-up to Inside Out, that it shared 2015 with that film. Because The Good Dinosaur turns out to be one of Pixar's most emotive films ever, caring less about writing an actual plot and more about exploring the emotions of joy, sadness, fear, and maybe a little disgust. Mostly sadness and fear, though. I wouldn't describe The Good Dinosaur as a fun movie. I totally get why people don't care for this film. It's way too sentimental, it's way too slowly paced, it's not as funny as Pixar's other films. It doesn't even give us the closure that something like Finding Nemo does. I would hesitate to call it a throwback. It sometimes feels like an animated film for people who hate animated films. It's an extremely naked and vulnerable kind of film, one with a singular goal and a singular purpose. To get a little personal, I find myself relating to the kind of stuff Arlo goes through in this film, because I remember what it's like to be a dumb, awkward, whiny kid, wondering why it's so easy for other people. I think everyone can relate to that. The Good Dinosaur is an incredibly realistic film, almost to a narrative fault, about how slow the process is toward maturity. How many times a person gets knocked down before finally being able to stand. It's not a pretty process. It doesn't always make narrative sense. It's absolutely brutal sometimes. But even through all these raging rivers and storms, The Good Dinosaur is ultimately a hopeful film. A film that believes that people are brave and strong enough to ascend beyond the clouds. It just sometimes takes longer than we were hoping.